Undercover boss orders breakfast freezes when waitress says she skips lunch to pay rent. This table is already reserved. The sentence snapped out with the firmness of something repeated hundreds of times a day. But this time, it rang differently cold, with not a trace of courtesy in the already quiet space of a sweltering summer noon. 11:52 a.m. Sunlight poured through the large glass window of Harvest Corner Cafe, a small branch of a well-known coffee chain in the northwest tucked at the eastern edge of Portland. Inside, the espresso machine hissed now and then like a racing heartbeat. The scent of freshly baked cinnamon pastries blended with the deep roast of Arabica beans, creating an atmosphere that felt familiar but distant. The man who had just walked into the cafe was none other than Michael Foster, 50 years old founder and legendary CEO of the Foster's Corner Cafe chain, once called the man who redefined American coffee culture. But no one in the cafe recognized him. There were no assistants, no cameras, no sign reading special event. Michael came alone, wearing a charcoal gray wool jacket and faded khaki pants. The dark sneakers on his feet were lightly dusted after a short walk from the nearby light rail station. No one would guess that this modest-looking, quiet-faced man was the one behind over 300 coffee shops from Seattle to San Diego. But that was exactly his intention. Michael was no longer young. A high forehead, silver-streaked hair, and weathered eyes marked a man who had endured many winters in business. But those eyes, if you looked closely, still carried something unusual, like a quiet flame flickering beneath ashes. Today was not a systems check, not a manager's meeting, and certainly not a grand opening. Today was an experiment on humanity. Michael had chosen to walk into a branch with the lowest revenue and poorest customer feedback that quarter. Instead of sending a warning email, he chose to sit down and listen. And that's when he heard the very first words, "This table is already reserved." The woman who spoke was Brianna, around 28 years old, the cafe's afternoon shift manager. Her brown hair was loosely tied behind her neck, sharp eyes, and a mask casually hooked over one ear.
She didn't recognize him.
Or maybe she didn't care to look closely. Michael paused slightly. He glanced quickly around the cafe. More than half the tables were empty. And the table he was about to sit at had no sign whatsoever that it was reserved. He smiled gently, politely. "Oh, if it's not too much trouble, I just need a quiet corner. I won't stay long." Brianna looked him up and down, then glanced at the clock. "Lunchtime is busy. We prioritize reserved customers." Michael nodded slightly without arguing. He moved to a table by the window where the sunlight spilled in, making each silver strand of hair on his head glisten as if lightly dusted with gold. No one brought him a menu. No one asked what he would like. He sat there silently, observing. At the service counter, 3 staff members chatted, laughing from time to time. An elderly customer stood awkwardly at the payment counter, unsure how to use the iPad ordering system. A young mother with her daughter waited endlessly with no one coming over to take their order. Michael took note of everything, not with a pen, but with memory. His face showed no emotion, but inside his heart began to stir. In those quiet minutes, he realized something the financial reports could never tell him. A store can be beautiful, the coffee can be good, but without kindness, it is nothing more than an empty shell. He still remembered the first time he opened Foster's in Seattle. Back then, he had only 42 wooden chairs, an old espresso machine, and one unwavering belief: the customer is a friend, not a transaction. Over 20 years had passed. He had seen his brand go far and sometimes go astray. And today he wanted to know, were the values he had built being left behind in the very stores that bore his name? Just a few minutes later, a young girl approached, not Brianna, but a waitress in her 20s. Her name tag read, Lily. Her voice was gentle. "I'm sorry for keeping you waiting. May I take your order now?" Sir Michael smiled. His expression softened. "I'd like a breakfast combo." "Could I have a cup of hot tea with that?" Lily nodded, then paused as if suddenly remembering something. If you go with the combo, it saves a bit. But if you don't need much, you could choose the smaller portion, less waste that way." She didn't speak in a pushy sales tone. It was genuine concern. Michael looked at her more closely. There was something delicate and honest in this young woman. He said nothing more, just nodded. In a quiet corner of Harvest Corner Cafe, a CEO sat like an ordinary customer, and a young waitress had just begun to reveal a truth he had never seen in any report. Michael stood up from his seat by the window, lifted the glass of water he hadn't touched, and calmly walked toward the order counter. His sneakers stepped steadily across the light brown honeycomb tiles, each step as if listening to the breath of a place that was once familiar, now so distant it felt unrecognizable. Behind the counter stood a tall, slender woman about 30 years old. Her hair was softly curled, dyed a deep reddish brown, tied up high with a few strands falling loosely around her neck. On her black button-up shirt, a silver name tag shimmered under the lights: Deanne Keller, shift manager. Diane's eyes swept from Michael's head to toe. No greeting, no smile, just the kind of look from someone used to judging guests by their clothes and the value of the watch on their wrist. She spoke just loudly enough to be heard, but clear in her disapproval: "This is peak shift. We don't serve strangers at this hour." Michael paused for a beat, as if weighing whether or not to explain himself. But then he kept his calm demeanor. "I just want a simple egg sandwich and a black coffee. If necessary, I can sit outside. I don't want to be a bother." Diane tilted her head slightly, rested one hand on the counter, her lower lip curving into a smile that was somewhere between condescension and smugness. "Our regulars get priority seating. Rules are rules." Michael didn't react for several seconds. He looked into Diane's eyes, not with anger, not confrontational, but as if he were registering something deep and familiar. Old memories rushed back, overlapping like blurry, slow-motion footage moments when he had been turned away from grand hotel lobbies in his younger days, the judgmental stares from security guards when he visited his first potential location for Foster's, that same look, that same tone. But this time, he was no longer the 20-something boy trying to prove something to the world. Michael simply gave a small nod. "I understand." He turned to leave, but the air behind him suddenly thickened. No one in the cafe spoke. No one stepped in to support him. There was only the soft clink of a spoon hitting the rim of a glass at a distant table, then silence. A middle-aged man with dusty shoes and a worn-out coat denied service simply because he didn't fit the rules of this place. Michael felt it more sharply than the stale air in the room. This wasn't just a refusal of service. It was a refusal of humanity because of an appearance that didn't fit in, because of unfamiliarity that couldn't be easily defined. Diane turned away as if her job was done. But he remained standing, not because he needed breakfast, but because he needed the truth. And the truth often only reveals itself when people least expect to be watched. A voice rang out soft and clear. "You can sit at the table in the back. I'll bring your order to you." Michael turned around. It was Lily, the young waitress who had greeted him earlier. Her face carried visible concern, but her eyes remained steady. She placed her hand gently on her apron, nodding slightly at him, a silent apology. Diane turned back, her voice sharp. "Lily, your shift is in the kitchen, not out on the floor?" Lily bit her lip, then lowered her head. "Yes, I'm sorry." Michael watched the scene unfold like a film he'd seen before. That small girl had stood up for a stranger for something as simple as kindness. And in return, she was reprimanded in front of a guest. He walked away from the counter without another word. But inside, he knew what had just happened was enough to awaken a decision he'd been waiting for the right moment to make. His eyes glinted with resolve. Breakfast had not yet been served, but a test had already been passed. A glass of water was placed on the table without a sound. Michael looked up. Standing before him was a young woman, slim, with dark brown hair tied neatly into a small bun behind her neck. Her face bore the weariness of someone worn down by too many long shifts, but in her eyes flickered a gentle light, the kind that only comes from quiet kindness. A small name tag pinned to her apron read, "Lila Summers." "You can sit here if you'd like," she said, her voice as soft as a breath. I'm sorry about the inconvenience." Michael nodded, offering a faint smile, not out of politeness, but a sincere thank you.
She didn't know that this small moment had touched something deep within him, a part of his heart that still believed kindness existed, even if it was sometimes buried beneath pressure, apathy, or misguided policy.
He sat down on the wooden chair near the window. From there, he could hear the clinks and rattles from behind the bar, the aroma of Arabica coffee mingling with the faint scent of pastries. The midday heat pressed down outside, but inside the cafe, the air felt cold, not from air conditioning, but from the lingering glances of contempt that still hovered behind his back. He was jotting a few notes on his phone when a lowered voice from behind the bar made his fingers freeze. Why bother serving that guy? A man's voice, low and almost a whisper, but still loud enough to reach the ears of someone seated nearby. He doesn't exactly look like someone who tips well. It was Diane, and the man probably one of the shift staff, the young guy in a gray shirt drying glasses at the corner of the bar. Both of them were partially hidden behind a wooden shelf, whispering while glancing sideways toward Michael's table. Michael didn't turn his head. He kept his eyes on his phone screen, but his fingers stopped moving. He listened. He remembered. And he stayed silent. A few minutes later, Lila returned with a wooden tray. On it was a plate of crispy fried egg sandwich with greens and a strong cup of black coffee, which she placed before him with the utmost care. "Thank you," Michael said, his eyes meeting hers gently. She bowed her head, lips pressed tightly together. Then, as if she could no longer bear the silence, she leaned forward slightly and spoke quickly. I usually skip lunch so I can afford rent each month." Michael froze. That sentence cut like a thin blade through the wool sweater he was wearing, touching the skin that had long been calloused by the business world but never truly used to the coldness of a system that didn't care about the people living in it. "I'm okay," Lila continued, her voice trembling, unable to meet his gaze. "It's just there are days I have to choose between having lunch or paying rent on time." Michael set his coffee down on the table. The bitterness in his mouth rose to his throat. He looked at the steaming egg sandwich in front of him, a simple meal, something ordinary to him, but to her it might be a luxury. He asked, his voice soft but steady, "Have you ever talked about this with anyone in management?" Lila gave a faint laugh, a sound caught somewhere between resignation and quiet despair. "They told me I need to set priorities. And if I can't handle it, there's a long line of people ready to take my spot." Michael gently tightened his grip around the coffee cup. For the first time that morning, his gaze no longer held its usual calm. Behind the frame of his black glasses, something shifted slowly, deeply, like the stillness before a storm. Since when, he thought to himself, did a person's dignity become measured by how easily they could be replaced? Lila stood silent for a moment, then lowered her head. "Enjoy your meal." She turned away. Her small frame disappeared into the kitchen like a shadow, leaving an ache in Michael's chest.
Suddenly, the numbers on spreadsheets, the copies, the performance reports all faded into the background.
What remained was a single, undeniable truth. One of the cafes he had founded, built on the principle that every person deserves respect, had become a place where a young woman skipped meals just to keep her job. And the worst part, that system existed beneath his name. Michael didn't eat right away. Instead of picking up his fork, he rested his hand on the coffee cup, his eyes fixed on the slow ripples in the dark liquid. Outside, a car horn blared from the corner of the street, but in his mind there was only one sound left, the quiet confession of a young waitress. He slowly took out his phone, not to open the notes app, not to send a message, but to activate the voice recorder. A soft beep echoed, and then he began to speak very gently, almost only to himself. Personal note, Wednesday, 11:58. Harvest Corner Branch. A junior staff member admitted she has to skip lunch to keep her job. No food assistance. No clear tip distribution. Management response: if she can't handle it, she can leave. His fingers tapped lightly on the wooden table, a subconscious habit whenever he needed to focus. He was used to reviewing payrolls, used to analyzing data points. But what was happening here was something no metric could measure. He looked up, glancing to his right. Diane was laughing, chatting with a group of regulars. Her mouth smiled. Her eyes smiled. but all he could see in those eyes was a cold, smug confidence. Michael reached into his wallet and pulled out a small black card. Not a credit card, but a special card issued to the founder, one he never used unless it was absolutely necessary. He placed it face down on the table beside the untouched sandwich. His eyes narrowed as though a decision had just solidified. No more notes. No more recordings. It was time to act. He picked up his phone again and quickly dialed an internal number. A woman's voice answered after a few rings. Good afternoon. This is Foster's coordination office. Rachel speaking. Michael kept his tone steady. Rachel, I'm at Harvest Corner. Activate emergency internal audit protocol. A brief pause. Yes, Mr. Foster. Which protocol code? Zeta 12. This time Rachel's tone shifted completely. Yes. Zeta 12 is an emergency level branch audit with direct intervention rights from the founder. Do you confirm I do? I want someone from HR here within 15 minutes. Bring the tip distribution list from the last 3 months and call the internal comms team suspend all PR posts related to this branch for the next 72 hours. Rachel responded, curtly understood. Command received. Michael ended the call. At this point, his expression no longer bore the calm of a breakfast guest. It was the cold focus of someone scrutinizing the very machine he had built and realizing it was now grinding people down. He still hadn't touched his meal, but he stood up. He walked toward the bar. No one noticed at first, but when he stood directly beside Diane and tapped lightly on the countertop, the entire front area seemed to freeze. Diane turned around, flashing her default smile. Do you need anything else? Sir Michael didn't answer right away. Instead, he flipped over the black card he had laid down earlier, the one embossed with the words Michael Foster, founder of Foster's Caf. Founder-level access authorization. The atmosphere instantly thickened. Diane went rigid, and the barista behind her nearly dropped a glass. Michael remained composed. I think it's time I sit down, not for breakfast, but to hear the truth about how this branch is being run. He stood fully upright. The chair screeched against the wooden floor as he moved. And somehow, within a single breath, every motion in the caf seemed to halt. Even the sound of a teaspoon tapping against a cup rang out sharply in the hush. The entire Harvest Corner caf, once buzzing with drink orders, espresso machines, and murmured conversation, now fell into a breathless silence. He walked slowly toward the order counter, unrushed. Each footstep echoed like a steady drumbeat, resonating in the hearts of onlookers, as if they were witnesses in a courtroom awaiting a verdict. He stopped right in front of Diane Keller. Her gaze hadn't yet caught up with what had just happened. Part of her was confused. Part of her was clinging to her usual air of superiority. But her pale face had already betrayed her. Michael took out his phone and dialed a string of internal numbers, his hands completely steady. Rachel. This is Michael Foster. Initiate emergency inspection protocol. Branch code HC4. A few staff members behind the counter jerked their heads up. One nearly dropped a tray. Another froze mid-step between the kitchen and the floor. The female voice on the line replied, calm and professional, order received. Confirming Harvest Corner, Portland. Internal code 4. Initiating alert to the HR and communications task forces now. Michael ended the call and slipped his phone back into his coat pocket. Then he turned. And now his eyes were no longer those of a customer. Not the quiet, discreet gaze they had been all morning. They were the eyes of a father who had just discovered that the house he built had allowed a child to fall into darkness. His voice rang out clear and steady, no need to raise it. I'm Michael Foster, founder of the New Dawn Caf chain. And this is my branch. A chill swept across the room like a cold draft. Diane stepped back, her face draining to white before flushing crimson. One hand clutched the hem of her apron. The other gripped the drawer behind her like a lifeline. But there was nothing to anchor her now, not in the wake of the name that had just been spoken.
A group of customers by the window instinctively turned to one another.
A middle-aged man loosened his grip on his coffee cup and whispered to his wife, Foster, isn't he the guy from the Forbes cover? More eyes turned to look. Surprise painted every expression. No one had expected that the man who'd been denied service for being unfamiliar was the one who had built the very chain they were sitting in. But Michael didn't look at the crowd. His gaze remained fixed only on Diane. "What did you just say to me?" Diane opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She was about to protest, but then seemed to realize every word she had said earlier had been heard by many witnesses. Michael didn't need her to answer. He continued slowly. An older man dressed simply walked into this cafe at noon. "And you, the representative of this brand," looked at him, judged him, and refused service simply because he didn't look like a regular. He paused for a moment, letting each word sink into the air. "You didn't know who he was. And the scariest part is if he hadn't been me, what would happen? Silence." Lila stepped out from the kitchen, still holding an empty tray. She looked at Diane, then at Michael. And in her eyes, a fragile flicker of hope had just sparked. Michael looked at her, then turned back to Diane. "I have one question. Do you think it's normal for a young woman working here to skip lunch every day just to afford rent?" Diane froze. Her face turned to stone. Michael didn't wait for a reply. "I've just ordered this branch to temporarily close for 48 hours. An internal investigation will begin this afternoon. All payroll records, tip distribution logs, employee feedback, and service reports will be reviewed." He turned to the group of staff behind him. "And if any of you have ever been forced into silence, threatened, or skipped meals just to keep your job, I want to hear it all. Directly. No middlemen." No one spoke. But from somewhere in the back, a young female employee clenched her fists and gave a small nod. Michael looked at Diane one last time. "For now, you are suspended. We will contact you through HR." Diane said nothing. She stepped backward as if wishing she could vanish from the room. Michael turned back to the counter, picked up his now cold coffee. He took a bitter sip, sharp in the throat, but did not wince. Instead, his eyes gleamed not with anger, but with something deeper. He knew something had just changed forever. Lila still stood there, frozen. Her hand clenched the empty tray so tightly her knuckles turned white, as if letting go would mean losing something even more fragile than her job trust. A long pause passed between her and Michael. No words spoken. Then she stepped forward. Each step felt like a silent war waged in her chest. But she no longer avoided his gaze. When she reached him, she stopped. Her voice cracked but was firm. "Mr. Foster, if you hadn't come today, no one would have known what's really been happening here." Michael gave a slight nod, listening. Lila pressed her lips together, took a deep breath, then continued, "I'm not the only one. Marco, our head cook, has worked 3 years without an official contract. And Chloe, the morning shift waitress, she's raising 2 little kids. She never dares to take a day off, afraid she'll lose her share of tips." Her voice trembled. But not from fear. From rage. Rage at herself for staying silent too long. A sound came from the back kitchen. Marco, the salt and pepper-haired cook, his apron stained with grease, stood quietly in the doorway. He didn't speak. He just gave Michael a slow nod full of trust. One by one, people began stepping away from their stations, a quiet but powerful wave spreading across the cafe. Chloe shyly emerged from the walk-in fridge, still holding the milk bag for the next shift. The young barista at the corner of the bar put down the glass he had been polishing. No one said anything, but every eye turned in one direction to Lila, who stood there trembling and braver than ever before. Michael turned. His eyes scanned each face as if listening to stories they hadn't yet dared to tell. Then he asked slowly, "Is anyone here willing to write an honest report? I will read every word." No one hesitated. Lila set her tray down, took a step back then, as if awakening, turned and walked into the kitchen. A few minutes later, she returned with an old, worn-out folder. "This is the original timesheet before edits. I kept the originals every week. I didn't dare send them to anyone, but I couldn't throw them away." Michael took it and opened the folder. Beneath a layer of dust and faded ink, the truth was clear. Multiple time entries had been crossed out, names replaced over time, hours vanished without a trace. Each line was a piece of evidence. each page a silent cry for help. He flipped through page by page in silence until the last. That page bore a different handwriting, messy, rushed, but clearly Lila's. If someone finds these pages, please ask why they don't match the ones posted at the front counter. And please don't let anyone else have to skip meals like I did. Michael closed the folder. His voice dropped, gaze resolute. I promise you. No one will stay silent anymore. In that very moment, sunlight streamed through the foggy window. A thin beam struck the tray Lila had just set down, reflecting a soft, silver glow on the wall like a silent signal that the silence had ended. Outside, a bus horn echoed in the distance. But inside, this was no longer just an internal audit. It was the beginning of a transformation. Michael stood in the center of the room without raising his voice. With just one sentence, he brought all movement to a halt like a song abruptly cut off. From this moment on, the entire morning shift is temporarily suspended. A ripple of shock passed through the cafe. Towels froze mid-air. Some customers let out quiet gasps. As for the staff, all flinched except one. Lila. She lifted her head, breath unsteady. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, not out of fear, but something else, a spark she thought had long been extinguished. Michael turned toward the row of windows where sunlight spilled across ivory tiles and the New Dawn logo on the wall. He took a deep breath. This branch will shut down for 48 hours. Not to hide anything, but to start over. From zero. And I will personally oversee the retraining process. His tone was firm, but not punitive. It carried the weight of responsibility, a responsibility as heavy as stone bound to his own name. He turned back. His eyes met Lila's, gentle, unwavering. You didn't deserve this. No one moved. The room remained still, as if no one present was sure whether this was truly happening. Michael stepped one pace closer to her. No one on my team, no matter their role, should have to starve just to survive. No one should have to choose between integrity and their next meal. He paused, then took a thin envelope from his coat pocket, placing it on the nearest table. Starting today, you will be the acting internal coordinator for this branch. Temporary, but with full authority to propose operational improvements. And you will help me change everything starting right here. Lila froze. She didn't touch the envelope. She didn't rush forward with gratitude. She simply placed a hand on her chest as if to steady the pounding in her heart, then bit her lower lip, trying to hold back the tears. But in the end, one still fell. One tear. Silent. Michael smiled gently. But it was not a light smile. It was deep and heavy, like that of a man who had just seen the mistakes he let slip by for years and was beginning to repair them piece by piece. He turned toward the remaining staff. I don't ask for loyalty. I ask for truth. And I promise you this, if you dare to step out of silence, then I'll be the first to stand between you and injustice. No one answered. But from the row of seats near the kitchen, Chloe set her coffee cup down. She nodded. Marco, the quiet head chef, removed the towel from his wrist and stepped forward to stand beside Lila. Another long moment of silence passed. Then Lila spoke softly, I don't know if I'm good enough. Michael tilted his head slightly, looking at her the way a teacher might look at a student standing before their first classroom. One day you'll understand it's not about tips. It's not about Kais. It's fairness that keeps the system standing. His words weren't loud, but somehow they etched themselves onto the walls, the windows, the very eyes of everyone present in that room. And in that moment, something quiet took shape, a new foundation for a cafe, where servers didn't just bring coffee to tables, but carried their human dignity in every step. Lila gently touched the envelope, not to open it, but to hold it in her palm as if weighing not its contents, but the weight of trust. She looked up. Her eyes no longer brimmed with tears, but seemed as if a silent wave had swept through, leaving behind a calm strength. If I start today, do I have the right to change the shift lead? Michael nodded without hesitation. As long as you can prove why it's necessary. Lila turned. She didn't walk slowly. She strode with purpose directly to the shift board hanging by the big fridge. All eyes followed. She took down the whiteboard, picked up a whiteboard marker, and struck through the line that read Diane Morning Shift Lead in one bold motion. No one stopped her. No one reacted. She rewrote temporarily vacant under restructuring. Then she turned to Marco, the head chef still standing beside her. Starting this afternoon, we need to rebuild the tip-sharing system. Fair. Transparent. Everyone gets what they earn, but no one gets left behind. Marco raised his eyebrows, surprised by the decisiveness in her tone. But then he nodded, a nod that carried weight like someone signing an unspoken contract. Lila turned to Chloe, the senior server still sitting near the entrance. I need your help checking all orders from this week. If any customers complained, we write it down. If any customers were happy, we write that down too. We need to know where we went wrong and where we got it right. Chloe placed her hand over her heart and nodded without a word. But her gaze was no longer that of a wary, long-time employee. It was the look of someone ready to begin again if someone stepped forward to lead. Michael stood still watching. He didn't interfere. He didn't instruct. He simply observed a broken system quietly crumbling in order and a new foundation silently being laid. Within minutes, the calf was no longer frozen in fear but transformed into a worksite of hope. Hands rebuilding from scratch. Eyes meeting not with doubt, but solidarity. Michael pulled a small sheet from his notebook, scribbled something quickly, and handed it to Lila. This is a list of 4 branches previously shut down due to internal conflicts. Read their reports carefully. Don't let Harvest Corner become the next name on that list. Lila looked at the paper, then nodded. No. This will be the first place to step out of that list. Michael smiled. And this time the smile was no longer heavy. It was light like the afternoon sun filtering through the window, shining straight onto the New Dawn logo just freshly wiped clean of dust. Michael stepped toward the glass door. His hand had just touched the handle when behind him a soft but decisive sound echoed clap. He froze, did not turn back. Clap! Clap! This time, 2 in a row. Then 3. Then 4. The sound was not loud, not synchronized, but each clap rang out like a heartbeat, slowly finding its rhythm again after a long silence. He turned around slowly. An elderly couple, the man adjusting his felt hat, the woman holding a dark scarf, nodded gently. They said nothing, just touched hands and walked away as if they had just witnessed something they hadn't seen in places like this for a long time. A young woman stood at the counter's corner, giving a thumbs up, her hand still dusted with flour. A middle-aged man washing glasses quietly set one down, then lightly touched the New Dawn logo on his chest like an old vow just reawakened. No one spoke aloud, but everything was understood. Michael didn't need thanks. He stepped outside onto the sidewalk, shimmering under the early summer sun. The smell of roasted coffee and fresh-baked pastries drifted out with the breeze, but this time it didn't carry the suffocating scent of injustice, it carried the scent of something being healed. He paused for a few seconds, looking through the glass. Lila was leaning in to say something to Marco. Chloe was carefully reorganizing the shift schedule board. No arguing, no indifference. Only focus, the kind he once thought he had lost between all the operations and expansions. Michael exhaled softly, eyes still fixed inside that place where he once dreamed of starting a new calf generation, a place where everyone would be heard, respected, and treated fairly. A real dream, but once lost. And now it was coming back, not because of a report, not because of a massive PR campaign, but because of a denied breakfast. An offhand comment, and a single tear shed at just the right moment. He walked away, didn't look back. But in his heart, there was no sense of an ending, only a beginning, simple but resilient. Respect does not come from titles. It begins with a look, a word, and how a person is treated when no one knows who they are. A young woman does not need pity. She needs a system where fairness is not a luxury. And sometimes what awakens an entire organization is not a dazzling report, but a meal turned down a forced smile and one honest tear.